Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another College and Career Pathways, where every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday we provide you with resource information on various colleges and universities, financial aid resources, training programs, skilled trade professions, technical schools, all designed to help you make the best career decisions possible. I'm Toni Cureton, your host, and today we are with um, MI Student Aid, and we're going to be talking about the various financial aid resources that are available to you to help you um, pay for and offset your tuition expenses when going to college. Thank you so much, Felicia, for joining us. We're so glad to have you back.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure. And I do apologize I don't have my screen on, but it's okay. Won't be any different. You're still going to get tons of useful information. So it's more about what I'm saying than it is how I look, right?
Indeed, indeed.
So I'm going to go on and talk about Financial Aid 101. As Miss Tony said, my student aid, we did transition to a new department though, my leap. You see my name, Felicia Pelto, and then I kind of have a secondary access. That's where my voice is coming from. So you guys can hear me very clearly. But my leap stands for Michigan Long-Term Educational Achievement and Potential. So we have combined with a few other offices because we're all about the 60 by 30 and, making sure everyone has some kind of certification or education, at least 60% by 2030. So, and this is one step towards that, right? Financial Aid 101. All right, so let me go ahead and get started. So, the agenda we're going to have today, institutions to consider, the types of financial aid that's out there, the FAFSA, and how it is the key to the entire process. You're going to get sick of hearing me say, the FAFSA is needed for this, the FAFSA is needed for that, because that's just how integral it is to this entire process. Um, and then the federal programs and the state programs that fall from completing the FAFSA, MISSG, which is our student portal. I'm going to talk about why it's important for you to create a portal, especially for some of our scholarship opportunities. And then, of course, Q&A if you have any. All right, so the institution types. Now, there's three main kinds, right? There's the community college, private college and university, as well as the public and private colleges and universities. So then in my three bullet points for each, the main focus I want you to have is, at least first, initially, is this average cost of attendance. Average cost of attendance is also interchangeably said as student budget. It's what is anticipated for, or the estimate that a student might expect to pay at that school for an academic year's time, right? So for one standard academic year, which is usually 9 months for a school, and it's the same school year you experience now, right? You typically go to school August, September, you got winter break that's coming up, and then you're going to start your second semester in January after winter break, and then it ends usually about May, June. So same exact feel. And so this, except now you're going to be considered paying for it. And so this is, again, the average cost of attendance. Keep in mind, schools can be above, at, or below this number. And let me get my little laser pointer here, because that's always helpful so you know where I'm at. So schools can be above, at, or below this number. And typically it's anything that it costs to attend the institution. So it's going to be tuition and fees, books and supplies, personal miscellaneous expenses. Sometimes transportation costs is included in that, especially with a community college. You're considered typically a commuter student, except I will say my alma mater, Jackson College, is the one that I'm aware of that has housing. Yeah, room and dorms. They actually built them as I was on my way out. I mean, I was local anyway, so I did commute. But my whole point is that might be an interest if you're really that interested in getting away, but don't want to pay this higher price. Okay. And maybe what you're looking for is something that's 2 years and under, right? A license program, certification, or associate's degree. So you still have that kind of 4 year experience ish with the whole living in a dorm, getting the meal plan without going all 4 years, so that's an option. You can also look at, as I mentioned, the 2-year programs, but 3+1 programs if you're really considering going to a 4-year institution, right? And what those are articulation agreements. And it essentially allows you to spend 3 years paying the community college costs. And then, assuming that you work with that school, the public or private college that you're going to transfer to, and they accept all the credits from the community college, you only spend 1 year paying this higher price. And that's going to be the biggest benefit because they transfer all those credits to them, they stamp it on their degree and say, yep, you got it from our institution, even though majority of your credits came from the community college. So that's another great way right now I'm telling you on how to save money. Another thing to consider when it comes to public, you get a discount for going to your public institutions. Most people out of state will be paying this price or more, as well as you going out of state. You'll pay that out of state price, which is always significantly more, simply because when it comes to taxes, living here as a Michigander, you, your family, everyone's been investing technically in the taxes of our state. So that's why you get a discount. And when you go out of state, they're not giving you a discount. So keep that in mind. I often tell students, get your education from home and then you can go move anywhere you want, right? Take that first paycheck or go get hired. I can actually speak to that. My nephew, I'm very proud of him, just got a job and he's relocating to Texas and they're actually helping with that relocation cost, right? How cool is that? So, I say that just to hopefully give you some motivation, some inspiration. Know that a real person, right? I can go touch my nephew. He has gotten a job in Texas and he's going to be relocating. So he followed the advice. He got his degree from MSU, graduated, sought out a job where he wanted to live in the future. And now it took him a little bit of time, but now he's finally getting that opportunity to relocate and it's on someone else's dime. Sweet. All right. And then when it comes to private colleges and universities, you might be thinking, why would somebody pay this big old price? Why would they pay this? Why would you consciously go, I want to spend 30,000 more than my in-state school or go to a private school? Typically it's because maybe they dominate a specific area. An example I've been hearing a lot on the radio is Madonna University, which is a local, depending on where you live, but they have been saying, hey, want to change careers? Got your bachelor's degree? Come and get your ABSN from us, and we'll get you into your nursing career in 16 months. Well, typically, if a bachelor's degree, somebody that has their bachelor's degree, it requires you to go at least another 2 years to get that degree. And they're saying you can get done in 16 months. That's why you would pay that extra amount of money. Because if you're ready to get something done and done quick and they specialize in that area, they can get you there a little bit faster than, if you went to your community college or your in district or not in district, public 4-year institution, like if you went to MSU or Michigan State or even Ferris State. So those are just some examples of why you might think about going to the different kinds, but definitely consider them all, because if a private college or university is giving you a nice scholarship that is covering like 90% of that compared to your in district or your public college or university, then it might make sense also, right? You got to find what's financially fit for you. All right, I got a short video here that I'm going to play, and then I will add my 2 cents.
If you need help paying for college or career school, the Office of Federal Student Aid might be your best option. We offer more than $150 billion to students each year in the form of grants, loans, and work-study funds. And federal student aid can be used to pay for school expenses, such as tuition, room and board, and books and supplies. After you've filled out the free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA, you'll receive an award letter from each school you list on your FAFSA. This letter explains both the federal and non-federal financial aid options that a school is offering you. So let's talk about federal aid. If you qualify for and receive a federal grant, you won't have to repay the money. That will definitely help offset the cost of school, but you may still need additional help. If so, a federal student loan might be your answer. Remember, a student loan is just like any other loan. It's borrowed money that will have to be repaid with interest. If you plan to take out a loan, consider federal student loans first. Compared to private student loans, federal student loans often have lower fixed interest rates and offer many benefits that you won't find otherwise. For example, when it's time for you to repay your federal student loan, your loan servicer can work with you to find the best repayment plan for your individual needs. Plus, you may be able to adjust your loan payments based on your income. You also may be able to defer your federal loan payments, deduct student loan interest on your taxes, and even consolidate your eligible federal student loans into one loan with one monthly payment. Federal loans can even be forgiven based on certain types of employment. Getting a work-study job is another great option to help pay for school. Eligible undergraduate and graduate students will be able to earn at least minimum wage. If you have questions or need assistance, you can contact the financial aid office at your college or career school or visit studentaid.gov for more information.
So they gave a lot of great information. Initially, completing the FAFSA essentially applies you for all of these things initially, right? So free money, any grants, which the Pell Grant is that main grant that you're going to be applying for, and it's need-based, as well as a lot of scholarships, even if they're merit-based, meaning you earn that based on a test score or test score, grades, combination of right merit. But a lot of times, even those will require that you complete the FAFSA because they want to know that you're asking and searching for money in general. Usually, scholarships, one scholarship doesn't want to be the end all be all for a student, right? They want to know that you're looking for as many resources as possible because they want to know that they're one drop in the bucket with other opportunities. Okay. So, even if a lot of times we'll hear parents say, wow, we're not going to get anything from the FAFSA. The scholarship is worth you doing the FAFSA because that alone could tell you no just from that question. Have you completed the FAFSA? You say no, they say no money. Nope, we're not helping you then. So be sure to do the FAFSA if that reason alone. And I'll even share other reasons later. Then work study is another opportunity that is considered. Now you do have to say yes or no. I can't remember if they're going to keep maybe on the application because that was on there at one point. But I often say maybe is equal to a no, depending on the school's processing. So I know at some schools that I had even worked at, if we always gave it to the students that said yes. And then if there was maybes, we'd give them to those students if there was any money left, right? So if you end up saying no or maybe, that may equal a no to some schools, and you may have to follow up after to be able to get considered. And that's if funds are available because it does run out. And then loans, they are a part of the financial aid equation. They will be on an award, an offer letter from the financial aid office. So the main thing I want you to know, and I'll explain the different kinds here later, as well as I'll elaborate more on work study. But student loans are included on the financial aid offer letter, and they do have to be repaid with interest. So you have the right to accept, decline, as well as adjust or change the amount that's offered to you. And it's also important to consider whether you will earn enough after college to be able to pay that loan off and have a manageable debt. So there's four main sources of financial aid: federal government, the state government, where I come from, the institutions and colleges themselves, as well as third party. So third party is really anywhere I say you live, work, eat, or play. Anywhere money is exchanged, 9 times out of 10, there's likely a scholarship available. I often say to parents, be sure to ask your HR office simply because you might have worked there for a number of years and they never advertise a scholarship that they have. So be sure to ask because that's the case when it came to me getting ready to go to college. Someone, financial aid professional said, hey, tell your parents to ask their employers. My parents did. Come to find out they had a scholarship there for the last 18 years that they never knew about. So it's worth asking. And students, it's also worth asking for yourself if you're working part-time anywhere. So associations, foundations, clubs, employers, churches, unions, credit unions seem to be a pretty big one these days as well, that I've heard a lot of parents tell me, like, hey, our bank or our credit union has a scholarship. I'm like, awesome. So be sure to check out all of the places. And then there's the FAFSA, right? The free application for federal student aid. Now, in order to apply for this, everyone has to create an FSA ID, which is a federal student aid ID. It's a username and password combination that students will use to complete a FAFSA, along with other activities on the U.S. Department of Education's website. So that could include, applying for the further steps of a loan, learning who your servicer is at some point if you get a loan, as well as you can use the loan simulator even before ever completing a FAFSA just to estimate stuff out for yourself and kind of predict out scenarios. So that's also a great opportunity, just to even create that ID and play in the system. So the FSA ID is required for any individual who contributes to the completion of the FAFSA. This includes student. Now, in this case, we know our students don't have spouses, but hey, if they were working on a bachelor or after their bachelor's degree, working on a grad degree and married, then a spouse might be included. But otherwise, it's going to assumptively be their biological, adoptive, or step parent. And contributors, if contributors currently have an FSA ID, they'll just use that one. They don't have to create a new one. So if parents have older students that are currently in college, they'll just use the same FSA ID they did with that student, because it's all connected to your name, date of birth, and social security number. So I often like to say this is how connected it is to you, that when your student grows up and has a family of their own, they'll technically be using this FSA ID for their own children to go to college, right? So, because it's connected to your name, date of birth, and social security number, right? That should never change. Besides your name, right? Women's names changes, but still connected to the same social and date of birth. And then parents. So if parents file their taxes, assuming married, but file jointly, they will only need one parent to create the FSA ID. Now, if parents are married and file separately, they both need to create an FSA ID to essentially give their tax information as well as give consent. And I do see a question in the chat. I will answer that towards the end, just to so that I'm being respectful of everyone's time. So once you've created your FSA ID, you'll go to FAFSA.gov, or you can go to FAFSA.gov, go to Start Here. It'll ask some questions. However, once you get to a point where it's going to ask, please enter your FSA ID, that's where there will be a link just under it that says, don't have one, click here to create one. And I will tell you, it is very easy. I would say it's probably the easiest part of the FAFSA is just creating your FSA ID, because you've got all the information you need, which, as I mentioned earlier, your name, date of birth, social security number. You'll need a personal email address and a cell phone number, because it wants to verify those two things for just in case you lose access to your account, you can easily get back into it. And you'll need to create, I think it's 5 security questions. So that's it. That's it when it comes to creating the FSA ID. That's how simple it is. And I have several colleagues who call themselves tech illiterate, not my words, theirs, but they created them and say that, oh my God, I can't believe it was that easy. So I share that so that you hopefully can feel some confidence in terms of going into completing the FSA ID. And so you might be wondering, okay, so who's the contributor on a student's FAFSA, right? Well, it's based on the parent's marital status a little bit, but the primary thing that they keep saying is use information from the parent that provides majority of financial support when it comes to legally separated or divorce situations. And so sometimes we know that's still complicated, right? Because some parents are like, well, it's really 50-50. We really do our best to make it 50-50. And then in that case, I often will, kind of defer to this information here. And when it comes to a remarried or step parent situation, they say if remarried parent has custody, use both parent and step parent information. So at the end of the day, it's really a combination of, okay, who has custody as well as who provided majority of financial support. That's what the government's looking for. Now, is somebody going to come after you and say, no, it looks like this person was majority of support, and no, but they had custody over here. No one's going to be digging that hard. Ultimately, it's your own unique family situation. You've got to determine, kind of based on this here, if your parents are married, naturally you'll need both parents' information. If it's legally separated or divorced, whoever has majority support. If remarried with a step parent, use both parent and step parent information. If your parents were never married and not living together, same with that whole majority of financial support. language. And then if your parents were never married but live together, so, to them in the world, it's assumed that they're married, then you're going to use both parents' information. And then, of course, if you need assistance with this in the future, you can always call Federal Student Aid because they do have live support call center. And their hours, they've changed them recently. And I'm assuming it's probably because of that whole waiting for the FAFSA to come out. Maybe their people are working a little harder on that. But their hours are this Monday, 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Tuesday, Wednesday, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., Thursday, Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., and then they're actually closed Saturday and Sunday, whereas before they were actually open on the weekends. And some quick facts about the FAFSA. So the FAFSA, of course, is completed on FAFSA.gov. That is the official website. However, you will notice if you're someone that, like me, a little tech savvier, where you might notice forwarding, right? So you may type in FAFSA.gov in the top of the browser, push enter, and then you might see it forward you to studentaid.gov. That is legitimate. FAFSA.gov is the official website, and the government bought that link, and they keep that link for ease, kind of like, their short link, because it would otherwise be studentaid.gov, and now they've combined all of their financial aid information into that one website. But FAFSA.gov will get you to the spot you need to get to. Now, please, please, please avoid being scammed. That's kind of why I was going in length about that, because there are some fraudsters out there. I mean, unfortunately, anywhere there's money, there is fraud. And crazy enough, in my experience, I actually had the opportunity, not like it's a good thing, but to have met one of those people trying to, impersonate someone else's identity to get financial aid, get that refund, and disappear. So luckily, I was able to circumvent that situation and call the authorities. But it's legitimate, and I share that just so that it's a real thing. So pay attention to those emails, because now the government's doing a really good job that whenever your social security number or FSA ID is used, they will email you and say, hey, somebody submitted something on one of our US Department of Education websites. Was that you? And so that's another benefit of making sure to connect your email and connect your mobile phone to that FSA ID so that if it's ever used, you also get notification that it was used. Your FAFSA does have to be completed every single year, okay? Students have missed out on literally thousands of dollars just by the mistake of not completing it the following year, their sophomore year, which could cause a huge hiccup in your success and plan when it comes to college. So be sure to put a reminder in your phone, October 1, going forward. Now, this year is the 1 year that the government's working on, improving the FAFSA, making all these updates. And as a result, the FAFSA is not going to be available until December 31st. Now, I did get some article earlier today, some language that was saying that they're doing a soft launch, and that during that soft launch, don't be discouraged, but your information won't yet be sent to the people that it's supposed to be sent to until late January. The reason that is because the government knows that they aren't going to have the technology that schools need to process those FAFSAs until late January. So they already had kind of told us that in some of the trainings that, hey, students are going to be able to complete FAFSAs at the end of December, so essentially January. And then unfortunately, schools aren't going to be able to start being able to process their information until end of January, thus February. So just keep in mind, everything is pushed late, but for your own purposes, be sure to put October 1 as your reminder due FAFSA date going forward, okay? And I say this because when you really think about it, you're going to be in the throes of your new semester, and you're not going to be thinking about FAFSA, right? You're going to be busy, you're going to be preoccupied. So you do need reminders or planners, whatever it is that is an alarm or a reminder for you. set that up for yourself for October 1 so you don't miss out on any of your financial aid. You can even sign up for email updates with us if you want, and we can email you, or you can sign up via social media, and we can also let you know there because we're always doing campaigns to keep everybody abreast of any changes. So we only have one grant opportunity that actually has a FAFSA deadline. And the FAFSA deadline for the Michigan tuition grant, it's May 1st. So for this example, December, you're going to do your FAFSA. It's May of 2024 that we're looking at. And this is specifically if you're looking at going to a private or independent school anyway. So if that's a yes for you, that you're considering those school types, then this grant's relevant. If you're only looking at public schools and community colleges, then you don't even got to worry about this. And then once you complete the FAFSA, you're going to get something known as a student aid index. And that's, I'm going to abbreviate it to SAI, but that's what is calculated as a result of completing the FAFSA. And so that SAI, it's sent directly to the different colleges and universities that you include on the FAFSA, as well as state agencies such as myself. And keep in mind, you can put up to 20 schools on the FAFSA this year, okay? That's a lot of schools. I don't even remember having 5 schools on my FAFSA that I truly wanted to go to. So 20 is a big consideration, but, to each his own. SAI is also the number used to determine how much federal student aid a student may be eligible for. So this is what the schools are going to be using to determine pretty much everything, that whole offer letter. Some schools use it to determine their own institutional aid. And so the variables that impact SAI are both student and parent income, assets, and then the amount in taxes paid. And now I have just a short video talking about dependency status.
When you fill out the FAFSA, you'll be asked several questions that will determine whether you are an independent or dependent student. This is an important distinction because if you're a dependent student, then you'll need to include your parents' financial information on your FAFSA. This means that your parents' financial information will be considered along with your information to determine your eligibility for federal student aid. So how do you figure out if you're an independent or dependent student? Generally, if you are a graduate student, on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces, a veteran, are married, have children whom you support, or are 24 or older, then you are considered an independent student. If you don't meet any of these criteria, then you're likely considered a dependent student and will have to provide your parents' financial information when completing the FAFSA. If you have a different living situation, including divorced parents or living under the care of a grandparent or other relative, the online FAFSA will provide guidance to help you answer the parent questions. In other special circumstances, your status may not be as easy to determine, and you'll need guidance from the financial aid office at the college or career school you plan to attend. Some common questions that people often ask are, what if the FAFSA tells me I'm a dependent student, but my parents don't claim me on their taxes, or I've moved out of their house and am financially independent? While these situations do arise, they aren't part of the criteria for independent status on the FAFSA. So you would still be required to report your parents' financial information on the FAFSA. What if I'm considered a dependent student but have no contact with my parents or access to their information? There are other options available to you in these situations, so it is possible for a dependent student to submit the FAFSA without parental information. If you have indicated on your FAFSA that you cannot contact your parents or access their financial information, you'll need to speak to staff at the financial aid office at the college or career school you plan to attend. The financial aid staff will tell you what to do next. So what if my parents aren't going to help me pay for college and refuse to provide information from my FAFSA? If this is the case, the only federal aid you may be able to receive will be an unsubsidized loan, which is a federal student loan that begins accruing interest as soon as you receive your funds. To find out whether you can get the loan, fill out your FAFSA and then speak to the financial aid staff at the college or career school that you wish to attend. If you have any other questions regarding financial aid, your college or career school will be able to answer them for you. And, if appropriate, make a decision about your dependency status. Their decision is final and cannot be appealed to the U.S. Department of Education. No matter your dependency status, make sure to complete the FAFSA to find out what federal money you can get for college or career school. If you have questions or need more information, please visit studentaid.gov.
All right. So, one thing I would add to that, because the federal government always, you kind of can hear it even in the question. They said, what if my parent refuses to help me financially and refuses to complete the FAFSA? Because in the government's mind, they assume if someone's going to complete the FAFSA, that they are helping their student financially while in school. But I'm sure many of us, and I say that, adults can tell you that plenty of us have gone to school, had the FAFSA completed, and our parents might have said, I'm not helping you financially in school. That is a real situation, and that can still be a helpful situation. So I say if your parent says, well, I'm refusing to complete the FAFSA because I don't plan on helping you financially, those can be two that can be a separate thing, and what I'm saying is that a parent can refuse to help you financially, but complete the FAFSA, okay? Because in the video, as we saw, if a student completes the FAFSA by themselves with no parental information, but they can't meet any of the independent student criteria, or they don't have any kind of unique situation that would help them become an independent student, then they are otherwise subjected to only being able to receive a $10,000 unsubsidized loan. That's it. At that point, it's up to whether the institution is willing to assist anymore or any other private scholarships and grants that you're able to find and recruit for yourself. But otherwise, that really eliminates even subsidized loan or sometimes institutional scholarships and various things because they want to see the FAFSA quote unquote correctly completed. And that sometimes in and of itself is also a criteria for different scholarships and grants. You may be able to say, yes, I completed a FAFSA, but right again, you may be qualified and eligible for what I'm going to talk about here, some of this federal stuff. But as a result of your parent just simply outright refusing to complete the FAFSA, that cuts your access. And that also cuts your ability to even be able to ask for scholarships and other grant opportunities as a result of that refusal. So I will often say, if you do have a resistant parent, I'm more than happy to talk to them. Toni has my information. I'm always willing to let her share that because my mother was that person that was like, the government's got my information. What do they need my information again for? She was like very resistant. This doesn't make sense. You're an adult now. You should be able to do this by yourself. She had all kinds of resistance around it, and I had to convince her every single year. So you can imagine how difficult that was. But I had to convince her every year, Mom, they're not going to come after you for any of my bills. You're not responsible for any of my financial aid. You are not going to be responsible for any of my student loans. You're just giving them an opportunity to look at where I came from to discern how much financial aid eligibility I will have, right? It's so that they can give me what I'm eligible for. That's it. That's your contribution, is giving enough information, giving our household information so that I can get what financial aid I'm eligible for. And I will tell you, that's a lot of financial aid sometimes for students. So again, if your parent's resistant, please let them reach out. I don't want that to be your barrier and to result in you having to get only unsubsidized student loans, because we're going to talk about the different kinds and how that's not a very good one. But if you do have a unique circumstance, you can go and talk to your financial aid office and inquire about something known as professional judgment. It's more or less a keyword that they use and understand. So if you said professional judgment, they're going to go, okay, what circumstance is it that you're trying to tell me about? And it allows your financial aid to be reevaluated if they find that it's one that falls into their criteria. Ones that we know that they automatically consider are changes in income or household size. And then when it comes to dependency override, because of the whole financial aspect of putting that information on FAFSA, it's often assumed that that's what you're looking at, like whether or not they're financially taking care of the student. But that's actually not what they're looking at. They're looking at the health of the relationship of the household, right? Because they're considering while you're pursuing your college education, is this a toxic environment or is this a healthy environment? And oddly enough, they care less about the money and more about that. And that's what will ultimately determine a dependency override is if there's a breakdown in the family as a result of abuse or neglect, if you've been kicked out, right, or without housing or at risk of being homeless. But again, they're going to be looking at something from like your McKinney-Vento counselor in high school to be aware of that, or they're going to be looking at, a homeless shelter director or somebody being aware of your situation, or some other circumstance, again, that requires official documentation. But they're not looking at that financial reliance, tax filing status, or where the student's living during the academic year to qualify for a dependency override. They're not considering those things. But once you've gotten through the FAFSA, these are the federal student aid programs that you'll be considered for. So there's the federal Pell Grant, Federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant, which will be abbreviated to FSEOG, Federal Work Study, the TEACH Grant, Teacher Education Assistance for Higher Education, so anyone thinking about being a teacher, the Iraq and Afghanistan Service Grant, which is actually in the same line as the 9/11 Service Grant, and it's more so directed at parents. So if the parent served in any of those capacities, Iraq, Afghanistan, 9/11, then the student may be eligible for this grant. So, oftentimes parents are like, why do you need my information? There's one reason right there. Because if you're a veteran and you did one of those things, it's going to check that and give your student that eligibility. And then there's the federal direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans, as well as the federal direct plus loans. So federal grant aid does not have to be repaid. Federal loan funds do. So these last two bullets are loans. Everything else is considered a grant. So Pell Grant is the largest federal grant as a result of the FAFSA. And again, it has to be completed every year because income changes, lots of things can change, but that's why they ultimately want you to do it every single year. For this year specifically, the annual maximum Pell Grant is $7,395. It doesn't have to be repaid because, again, it's a grant, and it goes to typically undergraduate students that demonstrate high need, which are generally low-income households. But the whole reason we put this in here is for awareness, right? This is what the federal Pell Grant, how much it is. But I often like us to think about my third slide in, where I talk about the different types of colleges. And if you think about that range I given from 19,000 up to 57,000 something, $7,395, this amount is assumed that you're going to school full time. This is supposed to be split between the fall and winter semester, so it's for that entire academic year that I shared those numbers for. This amount doesn't even scratch the surface of that average community college cost, right? But keep in mind that cost was assuming tuition and fees. If it has room and board, that's included, books and supplies and, personal miscellaneous expense. So, right, this doesn't even scratch that surface. And so I say that to say that even the poorest of us, typically one resource isn't going to cover it all. You have to look at multiple resources to cover that full cost of attendance. And you'll have to put a little skin in the game one way or another. And I'll talk about, what those various skins can look like. But just so everyone's kind of on the same page, right? Because oftentimes I hear people say, oh, if you're poor, everyone, that person gets free college. Or oftentimes people even say, if you're a foster care student, you absolutely get free college. While the sentiment is true on some level, there's still work that they have to do to identify themselves, to prove that they're in that situation. And as I've been showing you here, it's not just, they can walk in, say it, and it's all given to them. They've got to do some work. We all do. So that's why I share this too, is to say, right, you want to be able to get multiple resources, stack those resources to equal that cost of attendance or that student budget we talked about earlier. So work study. here's one of those ways that you can put some skin in the game in a great way. Because Federal Work Study, it is a grant program that allows you to get part-time employment to help pay for college expenses. It's typically awarded to students that demonstrate financial need at their institution. It doesn't guarantee on-campus employment, but it does make you more marketable, because instead of that employer paying you, $16 an hour, let's say, $10 of that is coming from this grant. And so they're really paying you only $6 an hour. And so that's kind of what makes it more marketable for the employer. Okay. But on the employee aspect, right, you earn a paycheck just like any other employee, whether you have work study or not. The funds go directly to you as the student, and you're responsible for managing that money. So whether it goes to any remaining tuition fees or campus charges, room and board fees, book supplies, or personal needs such as transportation. But other benefits that I can tell you are that you can't work more than 20 hours a week, which is a benefit. Most students might be like, oh God, but think about this. You're a full-time student. Full-time means 12 credits traditionally. Now that's 12 hours that we know you're in class. That's why those 12 credits are there. But there's a rule that typically you're supposed to study 2 hours per hour you're in class. So that is already, right, another 24 hours that you should be studying outside of class, plus those 12 brings us up to 36. 40 hours is what's considered full-time for an actual job. That's why typically on a job application or something, or if you're applying for credit, they'll ask, are you employed, self-employed, unemployed, a student? Because that's an identity, right? That's a label people hold. And they know students sometimes work jobs, but you may not have a steady income, right? But my whole point with saying this is that you can't work more than 20 hours, because if you're a full-time student, those 36 to 40 hours is already full-time for you. So 20 hours on top of that is now a 60-hour work week for you, right? That's a lot of time. So that's why the federal government says, if you do work study, we're ensuring that you can't work more than necessary, because you're a student first. You can't be a work study person and not be in college. That's the only way you can get this, right? So if you fail out of school, you also lose your job. And so I say that also another benefit is that because you're a work study student, that employer understands your struggle and respects it even more. They are your supporter just as much. They want to see you be successful just as bad as you do. So if you ever need to say, hey, I have an exam, I thought I'd be more prepared, but I'm not as prepared as I thought, they're going to be one of the first, most lenient employers that you've ever had in your life. As well as you're already starting to build great relationships. So sometimes with people that are operating some of the biggest parts of the college, that you can already start getting good merits and letters of recommendation, references and things like that. And you can already start possibly working in your area of interest just by starting at wherever university you're at. So there's multiple things I can say positive about work study. And the last thing I will leave with is that if you remember earlier, I said SAI, Student Aid Index, that it was a combination of student parent income, taxes, and assets, right? So in this case, your income you'll count it in the income area as you're supposed to on the FAFSA, but there's another area called need-based employment. And that's what this is, work study. So you actually will place your work study income in another area of the FAFSA, and it won't count against you in the SAI, specifically because the government created this grant assuming that you're always immediately spending it on current needs. So they're assuming there's no saving when it comes to this grant, like they assume there's some savings when it comes to other earned income for your college expenses. Okay, I hope that makes sense. But they assume if you're doing any other form of work, you're saving some of that money for college. In this case, because they know it's work study, they know you are spending it as soon as you get it for necessary things. All right, and then there's student loans. So I'm going to let the feds talk a little bit about it, and then I'm going to come and summarize it back up.
College or career school is an important step in achieving your future goals. And there are many financial aid options to consider. Did you know that a federal student loan can be a great way to help pay for school? After all, a grant, work-study job, or a scholarship can be a huge help, but these forms of aid may not cover the full cost of attending school. So if you decide to take out a federal student loan, it's important to understand what you are getting and be a responsible borrower. Getting a loan is a big decision. You might be paying your loans back for 10 years or more, so take your time to decide. And remember to accept only the loans that you need, because you'll have to repay them once you're out of school. Here are a few things to keep in mind when deciding how much to borrow. Do some research. Make sure that your school is the right fit for you, both educationally and financially. Location, location, location. The amount of money you need to borrow can depend a lot on where your school is located. In-state schools and community colleges may cost less than out-of-state schools. And finally, getting an idea of your future income is also important when deciding how much to borrow. Starting salaries vary greatly depending on your career path, so it's worth thinking about how the amount of your loan will affect your future finances. After all, your student loan payments should be only a small percentage of your salary after you graduate. Once you've decided on your school and figured out how much money you should borrow, you'll need to sign a promissory note, which is an agreement to repay your loan. Make sure you keep a copy for your records. If you do take out loans, you'll need to keep in touch with your loan servicer when repayment begins. Your loan servicer will make this easy for you by offering web, email, and phone contact options. If you make this investment in your future, being an informed, responsible borrower can pay off in a big way. If you have questions or need more information, please visit studentaid.gov.
So one of the reasons too that we share that video is just so that both students and parents understand that just completing the FAFSA does not automatically apply you for student loans. That's just one of, as you saw, multiple steps, right? They talked about you had to do a master promissory note, um, contact your servicer, essentially you've got to do more steps than just the FAFSA in order to get a student loan. Because I've heard it even referred to as a FAFSA loan. And I'm like, no, it's not a FAFSA loan. Because if it were, then that's the only step that would be required. It's the first of a few. But in addition to that, there are different loan types, okay? So you've got your subsidized loan. And I always like to abbreviate sub, unsub. Sub, the government subs in for you. Unsub, the government does not sub in for you. And what are they subbing in on? They're subbing in on interest. So the subsidized means you borrow $1,000 today, it is $1,000 until 6 months after you graduate or drop below half time. Unsubsidized, you borrow $1,000 today, it's more actually tomorrow because it starts to accumulate interest every single day. And then during that 6-month grace period that you graduated, as well as once that grace period is over, it will then capitalize that interest, meaning add it to the original balance of the loan, and then you'll start to accumulate interest on that capitalized balance. So this is why there's a difference between sub and unsub, and if one is better, it's going to be the subsidized, because you even have the opportunity, which I've worked with many students to do, the opportunity that if you do borrow a subsidized loan and you're working on finding scholarships and you're doing work study, well, you could potentially pay back some of that subsidized loan before it even accumulates interest, as well as before you even graduate from college. So you've got options. Like I said, if there's a better one, it's going to be that subsidized. Unsubsidized only if you absolutely need it. Because I say, consider a payment plan. A lot of times we forget payment plans are a thing, even with college, right? You can pay over time. They don't give you a bunch of interest on a payment plan. I've even known some families, usually international ones, but some families will literally wait until the end of the semester. They'll let a bill sit on there, and the most that the school charges them is like $1 or $2 for being late on their bill, and to them, that's fine. You know, they're like, okay, I'm fine with being late because they know they'll pay the remainder of that balance at the end of the semester. They do that, and then their students able to register. So just FYI, like it's sometimes We sometimes create anxiety, like, I got to pay this bill right away and it has to be paid in full. And you don't have to pay a bill in full. There's multiple ways to deal with bills. And then depending on the expense of your school, okay, so typically an offer letter is going to have grants, scholarships. Then there's an area called self-help where they'll have work study and loans, sub and unsub loans offered to you. And if your school is pretty expensive, meaning those things don't cover it, they will suggest a Parent Plus loan for the remaining amount of that cost of attendance. That amount is they're suggesting that the parent borrows it on behalf of the student. It goes in the parent's name. It can't be transferred to the student. And this one is loan based. This loan is based on credit, meaning credit FICO score credit. Whereas a student's loan is based on credit, how many credits they're taking in the semester. So different kinds of credit. But if a parent wants to be helpful to their student without borrowing loans, I have suggested, even as a professional, to parents, if one has not so good credit, to apply for a Parent Plus loan, get denied, because in that denial, they'll suggest doing a third-party cosigner. And if you decline a third-party cosigner, they will then ask if you want to then divert some of that loan eligibility back to your student, meaning allowing them to get more sub and unsub eligibility for themselves. So that's kind of a indirect way a parent could assist a student by helping them increase loan eligibility. All right, so factors to consider, right? We know college is expensive, so do your homework. Make sure you do pick the best financial choice for you, right? Understand how much and what you're borrowing, and ask questions when you don't understand. The financial aid office isn't as scary as it seems, right? I'm a previous financial aid professional, assistant director. I never minded a student coming and asking questions. If anything, I encouraged it, because it showed me that you were actually paying attention and that you're just not numbly going through this experience, that you're awake and that you're making decisions, right? You're just not being led through it. Because that's actually how I've seen students kind of wake up at the end of their 4 years and go, how is it that I owe 40,000 or 50,000 or whatever it is? And part of that was because, kind of like when we buy a new cell phone, how you have to accept the terms and conditions, and there's like 100 and some pages of it. No one really reads that, right? Like, we all just accept the terms and conditions because we know that we have to in order to use the device, right? So typically students will go to the financial aid office and go, okay, I see I got this loan here. What do I do? And, they'll just sit you down at a computer and say, these are the steps you got to take in order to get that loan. And they won't read it. They won't do, because typically to borrow the loan, there's activities you have to do within that loan counseling that's going to educate you and tell you, like, this is how much you're borrowing, this is how much you're due. This master promissory note lasts for 10 years, right? So you don't have to do this every year. That loan's now going to pop up on your award letter year after year, and you need to pay attention to that. And so it gives them all these warnings, but oftentimes, just like the terms and conditions on our phone, we just click through. We just click yes and say, okay, yep, I understand the terms and conditions of this, without ever reading it. And then that's how that loan amount sneaks up on you one day. So be sure to slow down and actually read the terms and conditions, because it's only coming up that one time. So learn your repayment options as well, because you'd be surprised as to how many of my colleagues, now I work in state government, right? How many of my colleagues, when I started my role, this particular role a few years ago, that I had to convince them to apply for public service loan forgiveness. Because that's an option right now. You work 10 years in a government job, you got loans, they can be forgiven if you apply for that, if they're federal student loans. And the number of colleagues I had to say, please apply and make me look stupid. I'm like, apply and prove to me that they won't do it for you, because they self-selected out. They thought, oh, I don't qualify. And I'm giving you this example because I know amongst your journey as a student, You are going to self-select out of things. We do it all the time. We go, oh, there's an application for a scholarship or a grant. And you see one thing, whatever it might be. Maybe it's an essay you have to write. Maybe it's, proof of community service or something like that, that you're like, oh man, that's so much work. Well, I'm not going to be eligible for it anyway. Let them tell you no. Okay. Go through the work and let them tell you no, because every single one of my colleagues that I convinced to say, show me, make me look stupid, apply and show me that letter that they told you no, they came back and they go, Felicia, oh my God, it's happened. My loans were forgiven. Oh my God, I am so glad you convinced me to do it. Like I was not going to do it because they told themselves that they weren't eligible, even though they met all the criteria. I'm like, so, I say this to you, apply to as many things as you can, regardless. Let them tell you no, because that's their job, right? As someone who's looking through applications, it's their job to discern if you're eligible or not. It's not your job to select out and not apply. Okay. And then when it comes to considering whether or not you'll earn enough after college, consider going to BLS.gov. That's the Bureau of Labor and Statistics.gov. They have all of this data telling you about if you get a psych degree, how much the average income that is, if you live on the West or the East Coast or in this state, if you have this job title, what the average income of that, and that can help you start thinking about, okay, and personally, I would probably look on the low end just to be safe, right? If the average of this job is 50K in the US, on the low end, it's about 40. On the high end, it's in the hundreds. I'm probably going to look at that low end in the 40s just to be safe. And if I do happen to be on average and making that 50, awesome. If not, well, at least I was prepared, right? Government loans are always going to be better than private ones typically, when it comes to repayment options, because I always say private loans are like credit cards. If you struggling, so are they. So they're not going to give you any grace, whereas the government at least offers income-based repayment. And a lot of my colleagues share their own stories and they allow me to share it. One of my colleagues shared that when she graduated from college, she couldn't find work in her particular field. She ended up having to do lifeguard duties in the summer, after she graduated, which was minimum wage. And she said when she got that loan payment, she thought, oh my God. She reached out to her servicer and they adjusted the payment and she could breathe again. So just so you know, they're not necessarily after you, like media will make you believe. But just make sure you know what options are available for you, because those repayment options do change on occasion. So it's good to, reach out to your loan servicer to learn more, as well as use that FSA ID. Then you can log into studentaid.gov and that will always tell you what the current options are for anything you have. So that's what's so useful about that website. So then my Office of Student Scholarships, Grants, and Outreach, we were able to appropriate over $476 million to about 78,000 Michiganders this past year. Most were based on financial need, and of course, the FAFSA is required for them. Well, for most. There are a couple that don't require it, but still always best to do the FAFSA, because as I said, pretty much when you don't do the FAFSA, you're saying, I got it. I don't need help. And you want to say, I need as much help as possible. And that's what the FAFSA says. And if you want details on our programs, eligibility requirements, as well as fact sheets, you can check us out at michigan.gov/my student aid. Now, these are the various scholarship and grant opportunities. So Children of Veterans Tuition Grant, as it sounds, for children of a veteran who either became disabled or lost their life in the line of duty, would be eligible for that grant. Fostering Futures Scholarship, that is for students that experience time in foster care. Michigan Achievement Scholarship, I'll talk about in a little bit. It's our newest. My Future Educator Fellowship and Stipend for those looking at, going into teaching. The Michigan Reconnect for those 25 and older that don't yet have a certificate or a license, can utilize that. So I often say, students, tell your parents, aunties, uncles, cousins about that opportunity. There's also the Michigan Tuition Grant I mentioned earlier. That's the only one with a FAFSA deadline, and that one is for private institutions, private or independent colleges or universities. Police officers and firefighters survivor tuition grant. So as that one sounds, if the student is a survivor of a fallen police officer or firefighter, they are eligible for that. And then the tuition incentive program, which is one of our largest programs, I'll talk about that also here in a bit. But for all of our programs, students have to complete the FAFSA, maintain Michigan residency, be a U.S. citizen, permanent resident, or approved refugee, must be used at a Michigan college or university, so you can't take it out of state, be at least half-time, except for Michigan Achievement Scholarship. That one requires full-time enrollment. Student can't be in default on a federal student loan. They have to get their high school diploma, certificate of completion, and its recognized equivalent, as well as meet satisfactory academic progress standards at their institution. So some quick notes. May 1st is that deadline for Michigan Tuition Grant, as I mentioned. No other FAFSA deadlines for any of our other programs. So going forward, that just means everything is first come, first serve, right? So if we run out of funds, ultimately it's going to be used, the FAFSA date is what's going to be used to determine who gets what in terms of that first come, first serve capability or capacity, I should say. But when it comes to FAFSA college order, so as I mentioned, you can put 20 schools on the FAFSA, but we're only going to see the first Michigan school listed on the FAFSA. That's the only one we're going to see. And part of that came from the fact that back in the day, schools as well as state agencies, they could see all the schools listed on the FAFSA. But when recruiters from colleges and universities had the opportunity to see a student's FAFSA, they started, using that as a recruitment tactic. Sometimes being like, oh, you're thinking about going to this school, or you put that school on your list. Oh, come on, And so students started feeling some kind of way about it. So the government solution was to limit who could see what. And so schools can only see their own FAFSA codes on the FAFSA now, as well as state agencies. We can now only see the first Michigan school listed on there because they only all allow everyone to see only one FAFSA number or FAFSA code, school code. So what that means is if you choose to go to any other school on your list, we won't know. So the best way to let us know is by creating that student portal I'm going to talk about here in a moment, or giving us a call at our customer care center so that we can update what school the student's going to. So the Michigan Achievement Scholarship, this was created, last October, I think it was. Well, no, it'd have to be 2 Octobers ago, it feels like. But anywho, graduating seniors of the 23 class and going forward are eligible for the Michigan Achievement Scholarship. And it was created by Governor Whitmer. And what students are eligible for as a result of completing the FAFSA, it would be up to $2,750 per year at their community college for up to 3 years, up to $5,500 per year at their public college or university for up to 5 years, up to $4,000 per year at the private or independent college or university for up to 5 years. And then there's actually a separate application known as the Michigan Achievement Skills Scholarship, where you can use it for a career training program for up to $2,000 per year for up to 2 years. So everything related to a college or university requires the FAFSA. That skills scholarship I mentioned does not require the FAFSA. The application, I believe, comes out in October, and students have to have their high school diploma on hand before they apply. So that's why it comes out kind of so late, because it's assuming that a student should have their diploma by then and then be going right into their skill program. And they should actually supposedly get pretty quick response when it comes to the career training program. When it comes to the FAFSA, they just need to complete the FAFSA. I will share that the 23 class was technically the last class with an EFC. And when this was created, it was looking at a 25,000 or 25,000 EFC. That was the 25,000 or less was the cutoff. We are still in development of figuring out what the equivalent SAI is for students of 2024 going forward. And a lot of that has been simply because of all the federal delays, right? Because if you think about it, schools don't even know how to calculate SAI right now because they're waiting on that technology from the feds. So we're in the same place as the schools are because they're not giving the state the information any sooner than they give the schools. So that's where we're at with that, unfortunately. But we will try and do it as quickly as we can as soon as we get that information. But in my mind, and this is just me saying it from just my professional experience, don't quote me or, don't hold me to it. But I mean, I would assume that it's going to be at least that 25,000, right? Because from what we've seen, the information hasn't changed that significantly. So in my mind, I'm like, it's going to be at least a 25,000 EFC, and it might even scoop up a little higher, possibly, based on some of the research. That's my hope, at least for others, is that, right? Let's increase that number, get more eligibility, because the idea or the purpose was to help those middle class that typically fall out of the range of need anyway. That was the purpose. So, sticking with that purpose, that's the mindset behind the research of finding where's that key number now without necessarily, killing the entire fund by running out of it so fast, if that makes sense. So then there's the tuition incentive program. This is our largest program. We affectionately call it TIP. This program is for students who have or have had Michigan Medicaid coverage for 24 months within a 36-month period, anywhere between the ages of 9 and high school graduation. So the earliest identified students are typically sixth grade, right? Because it starts counting in at age 9. And then if you meet that eligibility, 9, 10, 11, 11, 12 is usually about when a student would actually meet that eligibility. So that's why sixth grade, it's usually when a student will first hear about it. And we get a list from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. They're the ones who identify it because they're the ones tracking Medicaid coverage. And they just send us a roster and let us know who's eligible. There's no special application needed, simply that the eligible student needs to graduate from high school or get its recognized equivalent before the age of 20. If they decide to do a 13th year, earlier middle college, they just have to make sure they graduate before the age of 21. And then once they graduate from high school, they have 4 years to utilize their benefits, which means make us pay for something. But once we've made a first payment on some classes, then we extend their use of those benefits to 10 years from that first payment. Because we understand statistically on some level, when you consider that, the eligibility criteria is Medicaid benefits, right? Typically, there's going to be possibly some hiccups with those students because some may move out of the circumstance or situations that made them eligible for Medicaid, but it's not always that far removed from them. And so we understand that there may be some obstacles they'll have to deal with in order to truly complete that first degree or certification. But there's 2 phases to TIP. Phase 1, I call your associate and certificate degree phase, because that's what you have to be enrolled in and working on in order for this phase to be active. And once in this phase, if you're at your community college, you're in district community college, I should say, then we will pay the full cost of tuition because we always pay in district. That's essentially what it is we're always going to pay in district. There is one exception that if your community college, your in district community college, if they don't offer the degree that you're trying to achieve, so let's say you wanted to do welding, your school doesn't have welding, but I just know from memory, Schoolcraft has welding. And I feel like there's a very specific area that qualifies for in district at Schoolcraft. Most people I feel like that go are out of district. But if your in district college doesn't offer the degree that you're trying to get, but you go to another community college that does offer that degree, that's the exception where we will pay out of district for a student. Okay. And thus giving them the full cost of tuition coverage and $450 in mandatory fees. If a student decides to go to their public college or university, we'll pay the lower level resident rate, which is again full tuition, right? Because as a freshman, sophomore, that's what the rate is, lower level. We'll pay that full rate, full tuition, and then $450 in mandatory fees again. And then if a student decides to go to a private or independent college or university, we pay what is the average community college in district rate, which is currently $126 per credit hour, and then up to $450 in mandatory fees per semester. So again, a student does have to be enrolled at least half time, which is 6 credits, in a certificate or associate degree program, and be taking classes within that program of study. Because sometimes students will try and work on more than one program, right? It has to be in that program. And then if they are working on a certificate, that certificate has to be at least 24 semester credits in one academic year. And one academic year is a period of at least 30 weeks of instructional time. So assuming a student gets their first certificate, associate's degree, or enough credits to transfer, then they move into phase 2. Phase 2 isn't as great as phase 1, I know, but we do offer $500 per semester for those last 2 years. Now, typically, again, me speaking from my own professional experience, typically by the time you're a junior, senior at a university, and at least what I'm seeing of the trends lately, they're more than willing to kind of give away tuition and fees right now. Usually by this time, it's the housing that you really need to think about, right? That housing and meal plan. And so kind of going back to the beginning when I talked about those various costs or those averages again are based on averages that they want you to feel you can't change. Now, tuition and fees, that's always is what it is, but books and supplies, again, are an average. Usually freshman, sophomore year, those are your cheapest books. It's when you get into your 3rd and 4th year, the serious part of the program, when your books become like $400 and $500, depending on what you're studying, right? But as a business major, I remember my accounting book being $300. Luckily, I was using it for 2 semesters, but still, that's an expensive book. But I got really good at starting to negotiate, buying books from other upperclassmen and selling my books to lowerclassmen so that I could save money. As well as when you're looking at housing and so room and board, they're assuming that you're sharing with one other person. You could look at getting into a quad, right? Where you have 2 roommates instead of just 1, or 3 roommates, I mean, instead of just 1. And that's another way you can reduce price. As well as that meal plan is assuming an unlimited meal plan, meaning you can walk in and out as much as you want, snack and eat. But how often are you really going to make it down to the dining hall? Now, I'll tell you, I have a friend who realized that she lost 5,000, roughly about 10,000 her first year in college because she had an unlimited meal plan and she only went in there once, maybe twice a day. And in her unlimited meal plan, it gave her 3 meals and 2 snacks and a little cash to go get random snacks when the cafeteria was closed. So we talked about it. I said, girl, you should have told me. I would have went and eaten some of your meal plan for you. At least you wouldn't have said, lost money. But that's a way that you can reduce costs. Consider, what are you really going to be eating, and go, okay, I'm going to do a 1 meal a day meal plan with a snack, or 2 meals and a snack a day, right? Because you might be just so busy that you don't eat as much as you think you're going to eat. And then personal miscellaneous costs, I personally always joked around and said that's my go home and beg fund. Because that's a cost that's personal. That's why they call it personal miscellaneous. Those are reported averages that other students have reported to the college that they have spent money on. That doesn't mean that that's what you need to spend money on, nor do you need to borrow money for, right? Because I say the biggest crock in terms of borrowing is borrowing money for living and eating expense today, because you're always going to be living and eating, right? So if you're going to borrow for today and you're going to be paying for it twice in the future, because you will be eating and living somewhere and then you got to pay for yesterday's mistake. So if you can try not to have to borrow for that specifically, you already are ahead of the game. And then there's MISSG. So this is the student portal that I encourage all students to create. Now, if you go and create this portal, it allows you to do multiple things. You can verify your tip eligibility, okay? If you're eligible for TIP, you will be able to create this portal right away. Now, if it does not let you create the portal, all that means is that as of right now, you may not be eligible for TIP, but once you complete your FAFSA, then we have something in our system that identifies you and can link to you. A TIP record is automatically created by MDHHS, right? That's why a student could create this portal right away and it would be no issue. But if you're not a TIP eligible student, you just have to wait to complete your FAFSA, then come back and complete this portal. And then you can verify and see any other eligibility amounts, such as Michigan Achievement. If you're a foster care student, you can apply for Fostering Futures, as well as the other opportunities that I mentioned that would require some form of verification. You can also update the college on file with us and see payment status. How much did we send to that school on your behalf? As well as get other important communications from us. Now, if you go to our website at michigan.gov/mystudentaid, that's where I mentioned earlier, we've got program information, external resources for FAFSA. You can connect with us on social media, as well as the portal I just discussed with you. But we also have some scholarship search tools and best practices and tips. One of the tools that I really love is a spreadsheet. We have multiple spreadsheets. One is where you can compare college costs as well as financial aid award offers and see, once you put those numbers in, it automatically calculates for you which one has kind of the best situation. And then we also have a scholarship tracking tool where you put in, important links and detailed information about any scholarships you're coming across so that you can keep record on what your next steps are for that scholarship, as well as any renewable things you need to submit for that scholarship. So on our website, I mentioned scholarship tools. Here's one that we created, My Scholarship Search. It's Michigan Scholarship Search tool. And if you go here and utilize this tool, choose the county you live in, and then click this generate a PDF, it'll generate a PDF, but they're all active links to various scholarships and grants we're aware of that you should be eligible for based on the county you live in. So another fantastic tool. But that's it from me. So if you do have any questions, I will certainly hang out, but I want to thank you for allowing me to present this information to you today. I'll bring this back just so that you've got this contact information. And I will say this 888 number, our colleagues, I know each and every one of their names. They're real people living in the state of Michigan, state employees. So you do not need to be afraid to call this number and get assistance. It's the same number I called to find out what I was eligible for when I started college. When I had a girlfriend of mine that said, "Girl, were you ever on Michigan Medicaid? Oh, you need to call this number." So that's how I learned. And that was before outreach professionals like myself existed. So luckily and thankfully, we've progressed to a point that, I'm able to now tell students about it versus, back in the day, I was like, this girl nosy looking at my award letter, but she was really just trying to be helpful. And I love her for it because come to find out, I did have some eligibility. So let me look at the chat real quick. All right, this is a great question. If a student has a guardian, do they only include their own financial information? What about the parent when in the guardianship? So if a student has or is in legal guardianship, they actually would be considered an independent student. And amongst those dependency questions, they'll say no to most of them, but there's going to be one that's going to ask, at any time were you in legal guardianship, someone other than your parents, your biological or step parents, have custody over you? That's the question that they would say yes to. And then they just want to make sure they have a copy of that legal guardianship paperwork. So that the financial aid office, because they will ask for it, they have a copy of that. And typically some financial aid offices, it's just, some are funny, others aren't, but sometimes they will specifically look for seeing that guardianship end at 18. Okay, so that's an important aspect too, because if it ends prior to 18, some professionals will argue, okay, well, technically, they went back into the custody of their parents, so thus parent does need to provide that information on the FAFSA. So I say that just to kind of as an FYI for that person that asked the question. And then is the SAI the same as the EFC? Ultimately, yeah, they just changed it because they said they hated the fact that, right, EFC, it said expected family contribution or estimated family contribution. And so, as correctly assumed, you were like, okay, this is an estimated family contribution that I might have to contribute per year. But they were like, well, there's also the case that you might not need to contribute that much because if you get different scholarships and, and different opportunities, that EFC could be covered that way. So now they call it student aid index because they claim maybe this will make it less confusing. And I think it probably just made it more confusing because, right, everyone started to understand what EFC was over the years. And now they threw this boomerang. But now student aid index ultimately will be used the same way. But now it can be negative. I guess that's one aspect, is that now it can be negative. And because of that negative, it can sometimes help a student just a little bit more when it comes to that cost of attendance minus EFC calculation to really determine aid that a student's eligible for. I hope that helps. And I see a hand. Yeah, feel free.
Janice, go ahead and unmute and ask.
Okay. Oh, sorry about this. We
Oh, you're good.
we have some students that graduate before they're 18. And I know from just working with them that sometimes that's an issue if they're going to live at the dorm. But when we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about a guardianship, if somebody graduates before they're 18 and they
Uh-huh.
have that guardianship, it seems like our school has all the what ifs, the ones that they're not
Oh,
just
I hear
generally,
you.
okay, we know where the funding's coming from. So do
Right.
you, or just take it up with the college that they're going to go to?
Ultimately, yeah. Ultimately, yeah. But I mean, most of the time when it comes to guardianship, from my understanding, um, it's active until the age of majority, usually, unless the parents come back and, fight for that custody or decide that, it's no longer needed. But typically, as long as whoever has that guardianship renews it like they're supposed to every year, then they should be good. And so, to your question of, the student graduating at 17, that should be okay because um, when it comes to FAFSA specifically, they're more looking at not necessarily the age of the student, but whether or not they graduated from high school.
Okay.
That to them is kind of that qualifier that, okay, you are old enough and have the basic competencies to benefit from going to college. Does that make sense?
Yes, and then my only other question, and I know Miss Tony kind of helped me with this, but I just want to make sure. So we have kids that are going to start in January, so they actually filed for the 2023-2024 FAFSA. I mean, they just got their stuff done from, October till December. So that's what they're filing. But what about if somebody is going to go to school, let's say in spring, because we graduate year round. So spring
Okay, awesome.
or spring or summer, is that now the 2024-2025, or is it still that doesn't take effect? The 2024-2025 doesn't take effect until the fall, or does it also include spring and summer?
Typically, it's not until the fall, okay, for
Okay.
most schools. I will tell you, like, for example, Spring Arbor, or not Spring Arbor, Siena Heights University. They are one of the schools that um, they technically, like, their first semester is in the summer or the spring. Like, technically, May is
Okay.
when that's their front that's the front of their year is May, whereas most schools, right, the front or the header, that's what I was looking for, the header, is typically in the fall, right? So it
Mm-hmm.
all really depends on the school. But for most students, if they are truly looking at going in the spring, I would tell them to go ahead and do the FAFSA that's currently out there. And then when this new FAFSA comes along, do that one also, because then they've got all their ducks in a row. So no matter where they decide to go, in the spring, they're covered. You know what I mean?
Yeah, thank you.
Oh,
Lots of
absolutely.
really, really good information. So thank you to Ms. Tony and also to yourself. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, of course. I hope that, I try not to be long-winded, but then at the same time, I'm like, but this is a good example in this spot, you know?
This is a subject that you cannot exhaust and cut short. And it is a subject that you have to revisit over and over again in order to really truly understand it, because
Right.
even though they are constantly changing things, it just is a subject that you have to keep revisiting to be really fully versed in it. So we absolutely love it, absolutely love it. Janice, any other questions? All right, then we will bring this session to a close. Thank you so much, Felicia. Excellent presentation as
Oh, thank
always.
you.
Thank you guys for joining, and we will see everybody in the new year. Happy New Year and Merry Christmas.
Oh, yes. Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, everyone.
All right.